Street Fighter 2. Never has a sequel been as big of a deal as this one. The original Street Fighter was a comparatively more crude game, with lots of room for improvement.
Time up! Alright! You've got a lot to learn before you think to try thinking.
And its sequel was an improvement to say the least, turning out to be one of the most influential and culturally significant games in the medium. You see, this game came out at a time when beat-em-ups were at the height of their popularity. Gamers just loved walking from side to side and beating dudes up. So, Street Fighter 2 came along and really expanded upon the abilities that your character had. In fact, Capcom, who developed the game, loved expanding upon it so much that it became the butt of jokes for how often they updated it and the names they came up with for it. Often using words like super, hyper, turbo, and so on. The thing is, the demand was there for it. People couldn't get enough of it, and whatever changes they made were exciting. One of the biggest changes made was when they allowed you to play as the game's 4 bosses, who were considered the bad guys. That was a novel concept at the time, and really, even just with the very first iteration of Street Fighter 2, it was a big deal that you could play as all the different characters in the game, and not just a couple of them like in Street Fighter 1. This may not sound like anything special nowadays, but back then it was a fresh concept. What made it even better is that there was a good amount of diversity among the characters, both in how they played and the characters themselves. The characters all had different special moves that would drastically change what type of play style you would utilize, as well as how you would try to defend yourself against them. Oh, and the special moves were something that not everybody necessarily knew how to do, so it was exciting for people to throw their first fireball. They all looked pretty cool and just felt good to pull off, like you were being rewarded or in big trouble if the enemy used the attack on you. For example, Zangief is this big wrestler guy who has some pretty devastating grab moves he can do. He's basically just this naked hairy dude constantly trying to grab you and then smash you against the ground. Ugh, get away from me. Yeah, you'll want to keep your distance from him. And that's another thing that adds to the diversity of the characters. They all come from different countries, and their stages reflect this. So it not only makes for a varied lineup of characters, but an assorted selection of memorable stages as well. The characters also had some sayings that became pretty popularized.
Hadouken! Shoryuken!
Yeah, you can imagine a lot of dorky 90s kids saying those phrases or whatever they thought they sounded like as they pretend to do fighting moves. My personal favorite was Tiger Uppercut. Let me tell you a quick little story. When I was a kid, one day my cousin and I were walking around my block, letting out some pent-up energy from being inside playing Street Fighter all day. We spotted some poor suckers' plants in their front yard and figured they would make for some good uppercut practice. And we just went to town yelling Tiger Uppercutter over and over until finally the neighbor came running outside and was like, "What are you kids doing?" And we were just like, "We're practicing Street Fighter, don't you understand?" Let me tell you, those were the good old days. Anyways, this game had a huge impact on the console wars as well. You see, this game was such a huge hit in the arcades that Sega and Nintendo were chomping at the bit to have the games put onto their systems. And when I say this game was big in the arcades, I mean like there would be huge lines of people waiting to get their turn on the machine. It was like a social event, and it was a game, if not the game, that really popularized competitive video games. So, as much as people were willing to wait in lines to play the arcade machines, you can obviously see the appeal of having a home version. Nintendo got it first, and this was a huge push for them in the console wars. The game required 3 separate buttons for both punches and kicks, a total of 6, which the Super Nintendo had when you factored in the shoulder buttons. Sega eventually got the game on their system too, But the standard 3-button controller didn't have enough buttons, and so Sega made an entirely new, official 6-button controller, essentially for the sole purpose of accommodating Street Fighter. The game was that important. And it's still important today with a thriving competitive community. Not just for the latest Street Fighter game, but some of the additions of Street Fighter 2 itself. If that isn't a sign of a game that has aged well, then I don't know what is. Alright, so that about does it for this one. I'd like to ask you all to leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the series, and I will see ya in the next video.